And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. Today, we are going to be dealing with the subject that is in the air, and that is 1 year after the coming to power of the PPP in what I refer to as an electoral coup that was occasioned by a combination of regime change and electoral manipulation inside of Guyana. We are going to dedicate this week to exploring that subject. What has happened since August of last year? Uh, what is the situation in Guyana as far as governance is concerned? What has been the effect of the PPP's governance on the country as a whole, but in particular on that section of the population that did not vote for them? Are we seeing a continuation of the PPP's mode of governance from 1992 to 2015? Is there an escalation of ethnic concerns in the country, ethnic discrimination? We're going to tease out those questions this week, starting with today's program. My guests are Aubrey Norton, who is an executive member of the People's National Congress and a political analyst and commentator in his own right. Mr. Kedaki Amsterdam, an executive member of the Working People's Alliance, and himself a political commentator and political analyst. We are going to be joined later by Mr. Rickford Burke, political analyst, political activist, and commentator, and hopefully later on by Mark Benshop, the host of Straight Up on Benshop Radio 107 FM. So our discussion tonight promises to be quite interesting. Let me welcome Mr. Norton and Mr. Amsterdam to the program. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good evening. Good evening to you.
Aubrey, you're upside down.
Mr. Norton, let me start with you. We are observing
Dr. Hanks, Mr. Norton is upside down.
Well, what? I'm seeing him. I'm not seeing him upside down.
Okay.
Yes, Aubrey. Let's start with you. Your opening remarks on the 1 year anniversary of what I refer to as the electoral coup by the PPP in August of 2020. What has been that experience? What has been the experience of this government in power in the last year? Is there anything to celebrate?
Well, if you listen to the installed president, he was stating all the measures they took to reduce VAT. They were talking, as far as I'm concerned, he was in what I call project hopping, just naming projects. If you listen to him, you will hear him say that he is governing one Guyana. But when you look at the reality on the ground, it cannot escape us that the 1 year has resulted in increased cost of living. Virtually every item in this country would have increased by a minimum of 40%. When you look at the reality on the ground, it means even though they are mounting a reduction in VAT, it has impacted negatively on the people of Guyana. The most evident thing, however, I would say for the PPP's 1 year, they are one, incompetence, which is manifest in the increasing cost of living, in the poor handling of COVID, in the increase in blackouts, even though they were left with an electricity situation that was on the improve. All of those are manifestation of the incompetence. Then there is the corruption. A lot of the projects that you see they are doing, they are not seeking to put mechanisms in place for transparency and accountability. They are clearly creating slush funds so that they could access and enrich the PPP elite and their friends and family. So when he called all these billions that are supposed to be going into the pockets of the people, clearly they are not impacting the lives of the people. Take the cash grant because we care. I think the question should be asked because we care for who? We care, they care to have money out there so that they can access it and enrich themselves. We now see they turn into flood relief with the same situation and farmers crying out that it's inadequate and that there's highly likely that it's going to be based on political and ethnic discrimination. So we see the corruption playing its role. I think by now it should be evident to all Ghanaians that the PPP can outline projects like they did before. Remember Malio Falls? They built a road to nowhere. They couldn't find the contractor and a number of other things. Because the PPP is so involved in corruption, if they vote $10 million for anything, you know at least 3 to 4 million will have to go to corruption. And so the project, its quality, will always be in problems. I believe it is difficult, well nigh impossible, for Ghana to develop under the People's Progressive Party because whatever they budget, Guyanese will not get value for money. They have to put aside that part for corruption. When you see they handle contracts, avoiding the tendering system so that they can give contracts to their cronies and get drawbacks. And then the racism and discrimination. Irfan Ali can talk about one Guyana. He cannot he cannot conceal the fact that they said all people who got lands under the APNU AFC would be asked to return it or to face the courts. The only people that were asked to return it or face the courts were African Guyanese. I challenge Irfan Ali on this one anytime because it is a fact. The only people that were asked to return property were the Afro-Guyanese community. And so he cannot talk about one Guyana. How could he talk about one Guyana when they are instructing that African Guyanese and people who support the APNU AFC must not get contracts? What kind of one Guyana are they talking about? What kind of one Guyana they are talking about when they are doing everything to ensure that there are two Guyanas? One that is good for the PPP and its supporters, and one that is against Afro-Guyanese, indigenous, and Indo-Guyanese who vote, who they perceive to be APNU, AFC supporters. So the racism is real. Even in the distribution of assistance, they give tokens to African Guyanese, but when they go to Indo-Guyanese communities, they give them the means to develop business and to become economically viable. While
Right.
they are
And Aubrey, you've introduced quite a number of subjects there which we are going to expand later on. Let's bring in Kidaki Amsterdam. Kidaki, how would you characterize in general terms the first year or the last year of the PPP in office?
Well, I would characterize it as divisive. Divisive. We've seen from August to last year to now, every policy, every action of the PPP administration being one that clearly has division in the midst of it all. Every action. If we were to look at the economy, we would see that two budgets were passed, billions of dollars were given to the failing sugar industry, where it is perceived, it is believed, it perhaps is known that the majority of the PPP supporters are situated. And we have not seen a blind cent given to the public service, where it is believed that the majority of the APNU AFC coalition supporters are. If you look at the COVID relief grant, the $25,000, you and I have gone across communities across this country, and you know the stories. Indo-Guyanese, predominantly Indo-Guyanese communities, every occupant of households got the grant, as against one grant per household in Afro-Guyanese communities, and in many instances, one pink slip per household in Afro-Guyanese community. We've seen also, very shortly after they came into office, the dismissal of hundreds of Afro-Guyanese and replacing them with persons who do not have the necessary qualification or equivalent qualification and experience. I can go on and on in terms of talking about the divisiveness, because that is what we've been seeing, division. And a lot of the division has racist intended, as far as I'm concerned. So that is how I would characterize the PPP last year in government: racist and divisive.
Racist and divisive. Aubrey, let me come back to you on that very subject. You introduced it. Kedaki has expanded on it. The whole question of ruling in a divisive way. What is the linkage between the manner in which the PPP came to office last year and this program of political and racial divisiveness? Is there a link between the way in which the election panned out and this racist onslaught?
Well, first of all,
Aubrey? Yes,
one
go ahead.
first of all, one has to recognize that the People's Progressive Party decided very early that they were coming to power by any means possible. It started with the hiring of Merkel. They then proceeded to carry out a campaign. A lot of times when they campaign in their communities, they were campaigning on race. Jagdeo is on record as making statements that are clearly racial in nature. And so the intention was interest of the people of Ghana. It was always about getting power for the PPP elite. The second thing I want to point out is that they spent a lot of resources mobilizing the ABC countries who did not pay attention to the progress that was being made in the country, but were socialized into the PPP narrative. And then, as you know, we went to a recount, and when the evidence emerged of PPP electoral fraud, they and their allies decided that the recount didn't matter, and so they were installed. that they were installed meant that they are illegitimate. And now what they're trying to do is to use the appointment of the chancellor and the chief justice as bargaining chips to be able to get this illegitimate government recognized.
Right.
Now,
And
we
Obi, I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. I want to exhaust the race issue before I go to the other issue. What are the consequences of this racial campaign, these racial policies by the PPP? What are the possible implications of that for Guyana?
well, the first thing is that they have accentuated ethnic tensions. And if one look at how they handle the police in the 5 months when they used their supporters to attack policemen, which resulted in a police shooting one of their supporters, you know they were clearly seeking to intensify the tensions. Then their supporters beating the nurse and teachers and children again contributed to the accentuation of the tension. They wanted a situation where one ethnic group was pitted against the other ethnic group because, in their opinion, that will allow them to come to power. Now, so situated that, then their racism, including talking about poisoning the fruits and vegetables with interesting is that person in the PPP condemn it because it was of their doing. Them using the internet for their racism. The minute they came to power, they went on to persecute and prosecute African Guyanese even without evidence. But while they were doing that, AFN Ali in the typical PPP way, Jagdeo didn't before, proceeded to talk about one satisfy all races. But even while they are process of destruction of the African Guyanese. They chose emancipation for COVID. Clearly, they want that we do not care about African Guyanese. I have no doubt that that is their intention. And having done that, they continue to speak about one when their very actions they are producing to
Yes. We seem to be having some technical difficulty. The audience is saying Mr. Norton's volume is extremely low. Mr. Operator, can you attend to that? Let me bring you in, Kadaki, while we fix those technical problems with Mr. Norton. What are the consequences of the racial program that you mentioned at the beginning?
What are the consequences? There are several, but let me go to the last and what I think might be the most important and eventual. There is going to be a race war in this country. That is what
well, I mean, you're saying that there is going to be a race war. If what? And how can we prevent a race war?
Okay, there is going to be a race war if the PPP continues with the kind of policies that it is utilizing, and if they don't, as we like to say, pull back, if they do not change the approach to the way they treat with the people of this country, all the people of this country, not only Afro-Guyanese, But what are the consequences? And let me go back to the beginning now to say why I believe we will end up there. The consequences, as we are seeing, is an unequal distribution of the country's resources. The continued oppression of one group of people who the PPP founder leader, Cherry Jagan, said are at the bottom of the social ladder, and the policies of the PPP seem aimed at keeping them at the bottom of the social ladder. The racist and divisive policies of the PPP are continuously taking away resources from the Afro-Guyanese in this society in particular, and reallocating them to Indo-Guyanese and their cronies. And at the end of the day, as people say, it will get overbearing, and somebody is going to decide that they will take matters into their own hands to right the wrongs.
And as someone who is located in the African Guyanese community, having pointed out all that you've pointed out, how should the African Guyanese community, how should the opposition respond to this, short of a race war?
Short of a race war, listen, the response of the opposition, I would say right now, is not what it ought to be. I think the opposition has to be more bullish in terms of the response to the PPP. Everywhere, for example, I say they're all the shadow ministers, as they're labeled on the opposition side. The opposition, the shadow ministers, should make themselves present in every community and gather the facts as to what is happening, where the discrimination is occurring.
But Mr. Amsterdam, let me stop you. Right, you're saying the opposition ought to be more bullish. That point is well taken. But we are talking here about the racial consequences. There are the consequences of the racial approach by the PPP. How do you respond to a government that is engaged in a racial agenda? Do you educate your people about the racial nature of policies? Because a government can implement policy, and you can say, well, this policy is bad, but it's not racial. How do you distinguish between a policy that is racial and a policy that is just politically discriminatory?
You differentiate between those policies by looking at what the policies themselves do. Like I mentioned, for example, the sugar industry versus public service. You look, for example, at when Parag took office. One of the first things Parag did was to demand the return of a black doctor being trained in Cuba a few months from being graduated, because of some utterances they claim that he made against the government, right? You look at how one set of people are treated when they commit what you might consider crime. For example, we had the shooting incident with the REO of Region 9, I think. Up to date, that issue has not been brought to the courts as far as I understand. Those are not discriminatory policies. Those are policies that are simply racist. Protect those who are close to us, those who are like us, and those who are in the cabal.
Fair enough. When you say the opposition should be bullish, and you are part of the opposition, doesn't it mean that you have to call a spade and say, look, these policies are racist?
Certainly, and that is why I said they need to go into the communities, identify what is happening, and call them for what they are, right? Unless you go to the communities and you go with the people, you may not be aware of what are the policies at the local level. For example, I like to talk about Buxton Falls. The Buxton Falls NEC is controlled by the PPP for the last 3 years. Last year, for example, all the subvention money, Dharam Lal decided that his ministry will spend it. It was spent on street lights and Kosher Run. And if you look across the NDC, you would find that all of the crusher run, for example, were used in only Indian communities. Likewise, the community sanitation workers, they call them, it used to be CIIP. I know that a particular sum of money was budgeted strictly for the Buxton Falls NDC to rehire some folks from Enterprise to work as CIIP workers. And the instruction was that this money must only be used to employ people from this community, and they must only work in that community.
Fair
the
enough.
opposition needs to put that out there.
Fair enough. But you politicians, you all, when you speak about race, you all like to be politically correct. You're quick to say, well, they discriminate against African Guyanese. But it's not only African Guyanese, it's really supporters of the opposition. And that is true in some regard. But what I'm trying to pin you down here is a weakness of the narrative of the opposition. It tries to avoid calling race race. The PPP gets away with it because, you know, they say, oh, well, our reaction is to ENC. ENC is this, ENC is that. When they are, in fact, carrying racial blows to black people. And the opposition always seems not to be able to look at them and say, you're damn racist. That is what I'm getting at. Is Aubrey Norton ready for us? Mr. Operator, is Aubrey with us? Apparently not. Apparently not. Apparently not. Okay,
He's not back as yet. He's not back as yet.
While we await Aubrey Norton coming back, the issue of the economic situation in the country, the fact that cost of living has gone up, the fact that people are not seeing any direct benefit yet from the oil. I like yesterday on a protest in Buxton, Karen Duncan was saying that the oil is pumping, but people are not feeling the effect of pumping. Isn't it true that part of the economic hardship in the country has to do with COVID, or does it have to do with PPP's policies over the last year?
Listen, COVID is all over the world. And all over the world, you see governments are assisting their people and they're easing that economic burden. In Guyana, this new oil-rich territory, the opposite is true. The opposite is true. Guyana is, based on my understanding, the richest country per capita in terms of oil production. But Guyanese are not getting the benefits of that money.
So what you are saying, it's not the economic problem. The PPP did not cause the economic problem fully, but the PPP's response to the economic problem is what is at fault. Is that what you're saying?
Certainly, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, go right there.
Their response, their policies is what is making it hard for people. Because instead of using that money to cushion the economic effect of COVID, they're using it, God knows to do what.
But no, they've given $25,000 per citizen. You can't say they've not given the citizens anything. They've given $25,000, call it cash grant. How do you respond to that? You can't say they haven't done anything.
Dr. Hines, let's talk about $25,000 to citizens.
Yes, that's what I want you to talk about.
$25,000 to citizens so far has been a one-off payment.
Yes.
$25,000 to citizens cannot pay the average house rent for a family. There are many families who are not working because of the impact of COVID. There are many families who their breadwinners are not working because of the policies of this wicked government, which has dismissed them. There are many families which their breadwinners are not earning because private sector has been forced to constrict their operation. And so if a government is thinking about a policy, a grant that will assist families, it has to be at least an amount that can meet their basic needs: food, clothing, and shelter. Their basic needs. Let's assume that they got clothes. That grant must be able to cover them for food and shelter, I would say, for at least 6 months. COVID has been with us for over a year. Can $25,000, it cannot even suffice for 2 weeks given the market prices currently. Currently, as a matter of fact, a friend of mine was just telling me that she went to the market last weekend with $20,000 and she went home with a couple black bags. And that's not ration or supplies to last a family, let's say, of 3 for a week. And so if you're saying they gave $25,000, basically out of an entire year, the government has provided support for families for 1 week or 2.
All right, so $25,000 over the last year since they came to power. But they're giving...
Let me interrupt you, Dr. Hines. Sorry.
Yes.
Let me interrupt you. While they're giving folks $25,000, Professor Clive Thomas, even before the oil started pumping, did his calculations based on the projected discoveries, and it said Guyanese can get $1 million per household. And that was without the 12th find. As far as I remember, ExxonMobil has announced the 12th find of oil. And so that $1 million perhaps has been multiplied by 12, but people are getting $25,000.
Yes, I remember well that cash grant. Here is what the PPP is getting away with. Professor Thomas argued for a universal cash grant, which is you give people the grant and they decide whether they're going to spend it on the children uniforms, whether they're going to spend it on food, whether they're going to use it to invest in a small business or not. The PPP said they wanted targeted cash grants. What they've been doing is indeed targeting the cash. They target poor people for $25,000 for COVID relief. They target children who go to public schools for $19,000 per child. They are excluding those children who are going to private schools. And they're targeting farmers who have been affected by the flood. What we are seeing is that when it comes to the population that includes African Guyanese, the target is small, the money is small. And then they target that section of the population that includes their supporters, the money gets bigger. That is why Professor Clive Thomas preferred a universal cash grant. Every household get the same thing. When you target poor people, you give them a small grant. And when you target your supporters, like the farmers, they get a big grant. Comment on that.
Well, quite frankly, you've said it all. I have an image in front of me which says, look, when we are looking at relief measures for those who are affected by flood, in the rice sector, people will get as much as $80,000 per acre. $80,000 per acre. But when we're looking at people who have homestead farms, they will get maximum $100,000. That's a ballpark figure. Regardless of the size of your homestead farm, you will get $100,000. But in the rice industry, where the Indo-Guyanese are predominant, their loss or their compensation is calculated by acre. You can get, the lowest you get per acre is $45,000.
And that's right? Per acre.
Yes,
so
per acre.
If you get $45,000 per acre and you own 10 acres, that's $450,000.
Exactly.
If you have a small homestead farm, you get $100,000. Let me bring you in here, because this targeted cash grant is exactly what the PPP wanted, because they're able to then target grants to their supporters. And that's where the discrimination comes in, as opposed to a universal grant, where you're not targeting any special population, you give it to all of the households. I would like to hear your comments on that.
Well, first of all, if this entire thing was serious, let's take it that they didn't intend to discriminate, just for the sake of argument. There would have been some amount of studies and mapping to know what the reality is on the ground. A place like Kokwani suffered terribly, but did they go to Kokwani and assess the damage to arrive at what figure they will give? No. But in their minds, Kokwani supported the APNU AFC. And therefore, Kokwani must be at the lowest end. And if they had defined it differently, then Kokwani could have benefited. But once they define it in terms of rice acreage,
yes,
all of us know who are in the rice industry. And so they are fooling no one. They are fooling no one. The People's Progressive Party in the 2005 flood showed the same level of discrimination. When they were in Afro-Guyanese and what they perceived to be AP and UAFC stronghold in those days, the PNCR, the sum was negligible. When they went into the rice and sugar industry areas, the sum went up, as well as the things they gave to their supporters. So interwoven into the fabric of the modus operandi of the PPP is discrimination. I don't think they can help themselves. We have seen so many times. Look, from the time the PPP came to power in 1992, there was always talk about helping Linden, but it never materialized. In fact, when they came back to government this time, the house slave Ejil bemoaned the fact that in the 5 years of the AP and UAFC, electricity use went up. But he didn't consider that new businesses emerged, etc. I like to remind people that when I raised the question of agriculture in the negotiations in Linden, Ashley Singh said no to agriculture in Linden. Agriculture must be done by those who have the comparative advantage. And in his mind, the comparative advantage lies with Indo-Guyanese. And so I do not think they can help themselves. I think they see their survival and existence on domination. They believe that they must control and be very genocidal economically against African Guyanese. And so one cannot hope for change in the People's Progressive Party. If the PPP had considered, say, the chancellor to be somebody they will be able to control and dominate, do you think they would have asked for recognition by the government to appoint them chancellor and the chief justice? They are comfortable with the chief justice, it would appear. But from their approach, no, they seem to be uncomfortable with the chancellor. So in their mind, nothing must happen until they can get the chancellor they want that will rise the judicial system. The People's Progressive Party is a racist party. That's the bottom line.
Rob, let me come in on this question of the Chief Justice and the Chancellor and the recognition of the government by the opposition. And we have said all year that the opposition has already recognize the government by its action. And nowhere in the Constitution it says that the leader of the opposition must write to the president and say, I recognize you, before the government allows the opposition to carry out its constitutional functions. And there are constitutional functions that the opposition must carry out by law, by the Constitution, including the appointment of the Chief Justice and the appointment of the Chancellor. The fact that they have not done so, in my estimation, says that it is the government that has not recognized the opposition. Can you come in on that while Aubrey gets himself settled in here?
Go ahead, Kanaki, but I'm ready.
Okay,
go
ahead, Aubrey.
No,
did you hear my question?
Yeah.
First of all, that it is the government that does not recognize the opposition because it does not use the authority to allow the opposition to carry out its constitutional function. And the opposition is not preventing
but it is more than that.
From carrying out its functions.
It is more than that, in my opinion.
Okay, go right ahead.
The People's Progressive Party does not want to accept the fact that they were caught involved in fraud in the last elections. They don't like the fact that the recount exposed the illegalities. And so they suffer from compunction, a pricking of their own conscience. And so what they are seeking to do is to have the AP and UAFC legitimize them by saying the elections are free and fair. But the reality is, all and sundry saw the illegalities that occurred. That there is a president, that there is an opposition leader. It is a recognition that the government exists, but it is not legitimate. And you could be recognized and be illegitimate. So the reality is on the ground that they are in fact the government. The APNU AFC is in fact the opposition. And so there is recognition that there is a government and opposition. Where the problem comes is that the process that brought this government to power made them an illegitimate government. And so one legitimacy cannot come from the opposition saying, we recognize you. Legitimacy has to come from the ballot box. And the recount has established that they were involved in fraud, that 49 boxes did not have the requisite papers, that many people voted illegally, etc. So you cannot legitimize a government by saying, I recognize them. Recognition does not bring legitimacy. Legitimacy comes from the election. And there is going to be no legitimate government until there is an election that is considered free and fair, void of fraud. And so Irfan Ali has to live with his reality. That his handler, who is a master rigger, Barajakio, he has to live with the fact that his handler became involved in widespread electoral fraud, as the recount established. And so there isn't going to be any recognition. There isn't going to be any legitimacy, because the fact of the matter is they are installed and they are there based on fraudulent votes. If they are sensible, they will allow petition 99 to go through, which will produce the facts from the recount and establish clearly that they are illegitimate. So I believe that if Fan sees jumbies at home at night, whenever he goes to sleep, he wake up and 2 fraudulent votes jump out at the 2 ballot boxes without paper. So he has in his psyche that, look, I am here, but while I am here, I know these are the things that occur. And as it haunts him, he wants the opposition to say, we recognize you, so that some of its hauntedness will go. The only thing that can remove that is Irfan himself admitting that he's there by fraudulent means and is an installed regime. That's the reality. He can beg how much he wants. And let's assume by chance the opposition say, oh, we recognize you. Would he be legitimate? He will continue to be an illegitimate president, leading an illegitimate government that was installed as a result of fraudulent votes. The ABC and EU, all of them coming together to ensure they got the change they want, but based on fraudulent votes. That's the bottom line.
Aubrey Norton, political commentator, political scientist, and executive member of the People's National Congress. We're going to take a short break now, acknowledge sponsors, play some PSAs, and we come back. We'll continue this conversation on 1 year after the PPP was installed.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.
Thank you very much and welcome back to Politics 101. We've been talking in the first half of the program about the PPP's performance in the last year. And now let's switch to the opposition, because there is a government and there is an opposition. And government is partly due to how the opposition responds to that government. Let me start with you, Kedaki Amsterdam. How was the opposition performed in this last year, this first year of the PPP in office?
One word for me, lackluster. I don't think the opposition has met this government with what they should have met them. Right? I do not think that the response of the opposition was equal and opposite to the behavior of the government. So I would want to say they had a lackluster performance for the year. It is only now in my mind that the opposition seems to be coming to the fore, stepping up its ante to deal with the attitude of this government. For 1 year, we have heard the government say we are not recognizing the opposition until they say that we are a legitimate government. For 1 year, we have seen this government execute all kinds of policies without consultation with the opposition. For 1 year, we have seen the dismissals willy-nilly and very little, if any, pushback from the opposition in defense of those people who were being dismissed and those people who were being victimized by this government. Aubrey talked about the attitude of the government in terms of reclaiming land from Afro-Guyanese who were awarded lands under the coalition, as against reclaiming from Indo-Guyanese who were given similar awards. But I've not seen in one instance the opposition move to the courts to contest this behavior of the government. When the very government was in opposition every day, quite frankly, you could have heard of Anil Nandlal running to the courts on issues like these in defense of quote unquote their supporters. And I've not seen that attitude from the opposition. So, like I said, I believe that for the year they've been lackluster. They have not met the PPP with the kind of aggression that they should really have met them with.
Aubrey Norton, you were part of that opposition in some formal ways. How do you respond to that?
I will prefer to compartmentalize. When one looks at the opposition in Parliament, I think the young parliamentarians are doing a good job of defending and promoting the cause. As it relates to the judicial, I think a good bit of work was done, but more could be done. Where I have problems is at the extra parliamentary level. Now, first of all, the government is involved in what I call COVID repression. By COVID repression, I mean that they are using COVID as a means of oppressing people and suppressing political action against them. Now, I believe that the opposition needs to recognize that the PPP is in a dilemma. On the one hand, they want to open so their business friends make money. And so what they do is do selective enforcement of COVID. And on the other hand, they don't want to remove the restrictions because they want to use them for political repression. In this circumstance, where I think the opposition needs to step up and find novel ways of confronting the PPP and to fight COVID repression, because the PPP, I've said consistently, they do not understand anything except serious political action. And so I believe that in large measure, the opposition has done fairly well at the parliamentary level and the judicial issues. But when it comes to the extra parliamentary activities that are needed to put the PPP back against the wall, then I think the opposition didn't do as well as they should have done. There is scope for the opposition to take on the People's Progressive Party and bring them to the table screaming and bawling. Look, the PPP cannot withstand strategic protests in this society. Last night I said on a program, they are cowards. They have the reins of power and they judicially kill people and they can instill fear, they will do that. But the minute they are placed under serious political action, they tend to run and hide because in large measure, they are accustomed to domination and control. And so I believe the opposition needs to step up as it relates to extra parliamentary activities to bring pressure to bear to the People's Progressive Party. It's like, I believe they're testing these vaccine domination rules. They're using it as a test to see at which point people will react and how far they can go. The PPP must be in a mathematical problem. They said that they are enforcing these things because half of the population has been vaccinated. Now, they themselves said 250,000 people have been vaccinated. But the voters list they boast about had 600 and something thousand people. If 200,000 have been vaccinated, then it means that based on the voters list, the adult population, it means that half has not yet been vaccinated, but they are selective. One time they want to use the real numbers, 500,000, and then another time they want to use the bloated list, which they fought to ensure things don't come up. So they're in a dilemma. Truth was never something in their corner. They are masters of lies. They are masters of deceit. And here again, we see them saying vaccinated half of the population. When you check the figures of what they themselves said in terms of bringing in vaccines, there is no evidence that they brought 250,000 vaccines. And it gets worse if you follow Mr. Rowley, who correctly said the numbers look high because they are not WHO sanctioned or recognized vaccines. You know, they are prepared to use unrecognized vaccines. But I worry that people don't recognize them because they're illegal, like the vaccines, some of them they're talking. So they're in a real dilemma. And therefore, in dealing with these things, one has to analyze the situation and recognize that the People's Progressive Party, while they are making a lot of noise, they know in the last year they have taken Guyana votes. They know in the last years they have contributed to the increase in ethnic tension. They know in the last year they have increased the cost of living. They know in the last year crime has increased under them. We're back to extrajudicial killing and, execution style deaths. We are back to increased drug trafficking. So they're in a real dilemma where the record cannot stand scrutiny and they depend only on the public relations machinery. They believe in telling a lie 1,000 times, repeat it, and let the population believe it's true. That's a summary of the PPP in action in the last year.
We are joined by Mark Benshop, political activist and the political commentator, host of Straight Up on Mark Benshop Radio. Mark, welcome to Politics 101. You've missed all of the discussion thus far, but I want to bring you in. How would you characterize, in general terms, the first year of the PPP stint in office?
Well, thanks for having me on, Dr. Hines. Good evening to you and your guest, Aubrey and Kadaki, and to all of your listeners as well. I think your guest and almost all of Guyana have already categorized them, have already graded them. When we look at, I listened to a piece Aubrey spoke about economic genocide. That has been going on for the 23 plus years that the PPP was in office before. And I remember that term coined by Lincoln Lewis. And so we understand the continuation of the economic genocide over the year, that they have been installed into office. And I don't know, I agree with Aubrey, I don't know what is the fuss that they are fighting up to be recognized. I don't know whether they want people to recognize them as an installed regime or how much that means to them to be recognized. The fact of the matter is they have been installed and installed under questionable circumstances. When you look at what came out of the Recom Center, thousands of votes, illegal votes that were allowed to be accepted by the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission. I would have been, if I were Irfan Ali or those guys in the PPP, I would have been ashamed to call on people, to ask people to recognize me as a legitimate government under those circumstances. Having said all of that, when we look at what transpired over the past year since they have been installed, it is nothing new from what transpired over the past, over the 23 years that they were in office. You know it very well, Dr. Hines, what they have done in terms of going after mainly persons of African descent, political opponents, the extrajudicial killings of hundreds of mainly young Black men, wrongful incarceration of their political opponents, arrest and detention of political opponents, denial of their rights to freedom of speech, freedom to protest, and all these different things. We are seeing signs within this past year that the PPP has not changed. It is still the same PPP. vindictive, racist, and we see this by their agenda. They don't have any policy to develop Guyana. And so the past year since they've been installed has been a continuation, like I've said, of the 23 years they ruled Guyana for, with fear. And I don't think people are going to accept that this time around. But it's painful to see what they're doing, mainly to persons of African descent, persecuting them, whether it's the GCOM offices. They are going after Black businessmen, legitimate Black business owners. We see what is happening currently with the Likens Funeral Home. We see what's happening with fuel dealers, Afro-Guyanese fuel dealers, and all these different things we're seeing. The time has come, I believe. You guys said it in Buxton, was it yesterday in the protest? Enough is enough. The time has come to stand up and fight back. And when I say fight back, not necessarily, not physically or with violence or whatever, but fight back very, very smartly against this corrupt and illegitimate PPP regime.
Fight back. Mark, let me ask you a follow-up question. How would you evaluate the way in which the opposition responded in the last year?
I'm just smiling. I mean, other than the fact that the opposition, I believe it goes without saying, more could have been done. A lot of these young members of parliament, fresh members of parliament, as we would call folks who are fresh in the business or whatever business. In this case, they are fresh politicians. They are green dongs. And this is not being disrespectful towards them. I don't think that they need, they understand exactly what needs to be done, or even if some of them do, maybe they were waiting on leadership direction. And maybe the leadership within the coalition, combined leadership, they have decided that to take a quiet route, to probably take a little nap. And whilst they were taking that nap, the cats were out there drinking out all of the milk, and the dogs were out there eating up all of the meat. And now that it seems as though in the latter part of the 1 year of this installed PPP regime, some members of the coalition have woken up to reality. They say, well, look, enough is enough. Regardless of whether the leadership wants to go east, west, or whatever, these few individuals will take the bull by its horn, because things are getting out of hand. In grading the PPP regime, I give them an F. In grading the combined opposition, I give them a C-.
A C-. Mark Benchop there, giving his views on the PPP over the last year, the opposition over the last year. Aubrey made a distinction between the parliamentary opposition and the extra-parliamentary opposition. And I stand with him and you, Mark, when you say we can't in all conscience expect the parliamentary opposition to lead the kind of struggle that needed to be led against this, that needs to be led against this onslaught by the PPP. I think they're doing well at the level of the parliament within the political constraints. But it is the extra parliamentary leadership, I think, that when we give those harsh grades, that they must be directed to that. And I think, as you pointed out, in Boston yesterday, there was a protest. The protest is slated to continue in Victoria on Sunday. They spur the revolution every Wednesday. The parliamentarians themselves have started there in Georgetown. And the other organizers, as I said, have started to mobilize on the East Coast in the villages. And I think that's a very good sign going forward, that we can no longer wait on the official leadership to give direction of what is done. That those who are in a position to begin to lead this fight should start. And of course, the official opposition, I am sure, will join at some point. Aubrey Norton, you are in a funny position. You're part of the official opposition, but I know that you are somewhat independent in the sense that you have your own views and your own ideas of what needs to be done, what needs to be done. Going forward in the next 6 months, how do you see this fight developing?
First of all, I believe that when you're in opposition,
Kidaki Amsterdam? Okay, go ahead, Aubrey.
You hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. When you're in opposition, you expose.
Yes, Aubrey.
You expose and you agitate. I believe across Guyana, particularly in our support base, our people are ready to take on the People's Progressive Party. I believe that our people recognize that you cannot deal with the PPP at the level of press conferences. And so we've seen a lot of self-organization. I also believe that our people no longer believe in that decent, Christian-like approach in which you will put everything in order before you protest. It might appear presidential, but it is ridiculous in reality. And I believe our support base has begun to react against that. But I also want to draw your attention to another angle that we should be pursuing. Yes, we accept that all that is being done by the PPP in terms of grants, of cash grants, etc., are predominantly ethnic in nature. But they are also now isolating the small rice farmer by paying by the acreage. The small rice farmer who is really in need will not get the large sum. It is the big rice farmer with large acreage that will get the large sum. And so it starts to resonate even in the Indo-Guyanese community that the PPP operates in the interest of the wealthy, the rich, and their family, friends, and elite. And that the average Indo-Guyanese, particularly the small farmer, is facing in some regard some of the same problems faced by African Guyanese, even though not to the same extent. And I believe we have to do a lot to educate the small farmer to point out that the approach they are using to give flood relief is an approach that will make the rich richer and the poor poorer. Because if I'm coming 100 acres, it is 100 acres time what you giving. But I, the small farmer, might only have 5 acres, and when I multiply by 5, the money is small. You can't rectify the damage. And the big farmer who has the money, who can rectify the damage cause, is the one who carrying home the hog of the money. So we have to begin to point out to people that the PPP is not only racist, it is elitist in nature. It is classist in nature. It operates in the interest of the ruling class. And that is why I could understand Jerry Gavaya talking the garbage he is talking, because he comes from that class. He is one who got this blood, sweat, and tears of bauxite workers for next to nothing. My information, he's going after Watuka House, which should not be allowed by Londoners. But that little cabal, that elite, that PPP power drunk, money drunk crew, they are using the resources of Guyana to increase the wealth of the wealthy while giving pittances to the poor with the hope of protecting them while they exploit and rob the daylight out of this nation. So we have to do the analysis and recognize that it is both class and ethnicity. It is not
Yes.
solely a question of ethnicity.
Right. And
I wanted to
Aubrey
make that
Norton, your point is so well taken. I think the problem we have had in these messages is that we tend to put the race and class message together. What we need are different messages. We need to be clear and pointed, as we have been here tonight, all three of you, on the racial emphasis of the PPP. And then when we exhaust that, then go and point out that there is also a class emphasis here that affects poor Indians, so that we separate the message. There is a pointed message to African Guyanese, and then there is another message to Indian Guyanese. But those of us who call ourselves multiracialists, people like myself, have been guilty in the past of trying to merge race and class, and at the end of the day, we end up speaking to no one, right? So I think we've reached the point where we have to have a clear message of the racial discrimination that is directed primarily at African Guyanese. And we need to speak that, because that has to be a separate message from the class discrimination, which then includes poor Indian Guyanese. And I know, Mark Benchow, that you have been pointing out to our Indian Guyanese brothers and sisters that they too are being discriminated. Comment on that.
Hi, Dr. Hines. That is correct. All Guyanese are feeling the squeeze under the PPP, the installed PPP regime. Hardly, I mean, even though the bulk of the victimization is geared towards persons of African descent and supporters of the coalition. And supporters, I mean, whether they're Indo-Indian Guyanese or indigenous Guyanese, those people are feeling the brunt of it as well. I think you've mentioned the class attack. We also can be fair to say that we saw that even under the coalition. And part of the problem that we are faced with right now, and I do say that I'm a sympathizer of the coalition, I'm a supporter of the coalition, because I support coalition politics, is that it's unfortunate that many of the folks in the coalition, this is a constructive criticism against them, is that we are now seeing their faces out in communities that they should have been out when they were in office. We are now seeing their faces in communities that should have been empowered when they were in office. And the reason why the bunch of people are not embracing them as with open arms as they should, whether protest and so forth, is because people are still angry at the coalition. People are angry not because of any church-like approach in getting things done. People are angry because of that classism kind of approach where they got into the big fancy vehicles and they drove into communities, whether it's Buxton, whether it's in Linden. And this is not for all of them, but there are quite a lot of them who operated like that, this classism kind of approach. And so when we are painting the PPP, of course, with a racist brush, which, of course, all of that goes towards the PPP and the racism. We didn't see that in the coalition, but we saw a lot of classism approach.
Classism.
Those former ministers and former members of parliament and so forth. A lot of them, not all of them, treated even their own support base as well. And so the protests, 130 seconds, the protests that we are seeing or lack thereof, the blame has to be placed squarely at the feet of the coalition, because there was an opportunity almost a year ago to shut the country down, to say enough is enough, with the killing of those two Henry boys. People were angry. People were saying this is the start of other bad things to come, and they were shutting down the roads. They placed tires and other debris across the roads and so forth to say, we are not going to accept this at all. And suddenly you heard some sort of leadership within the coalition stepped in there and say, go home, guys. Everything will be all right. put it in the hands of the Lord. And here we are today.
Here we are
One
today,
year.
really big mistake. And just pressing the point I was making a few moments ago. Here is Desiree. I'm going to bring you in, Kidaki. She says, sorry, panelists, but you dilute the case being made for racial discrimination against African Guyanese when you go out of your way to include small rice farmers and indigenous peoples. I mean, I know you guys are political people and you tend to be political correct. I detect among our people, Black people, a frustration that we always go out of the way to say it's not just a discrimination against Black people, it's against other people too. And while that may be true, that is why I'm saying we need a pointed analysis and conversation with African people. Because they are being discriminated because of their race. And then a separate message for the other ethnic groups. Because the other ethnic groups are being discriminated, but that discrimination is not in the same way as African Guyanese. And there is a rebuke from one of our viewers. And I think we have improved a lot here tonight in the way we talk about discrimination. But it is one of the problems the established political parties, especially those that get their support from African Guyanese, they tend always to shy away from speaking about the direct onslaught on Black people because other people define us. And as soon as we say that, they say that we are racist. So we tend to shy away from that. Kiraki, Amsterdam. Kiraki, you're smiling.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I'm smiling. I'm smiling because earlier you actually touched that particular issue.
Yes.
Of politicians trying to be politically correct. I didn't want to butt head with you at the time to say, well, some of them, because I quite frankly have no interest in being politically correct. I call it as I see it. And the fact is, yes, I've seen ever so often members of the opposition, as a matter of fact, members of the coalition government, the entire coalition government perhaps, trying to be politically correct when dealing with race issues. We have seen, for example, when certain actions were being taken to rid many departments of state of unsavory characters associated with the PPP. The first thing the PPP said, racism. And those actions came to an end. I always argue that one of the problems with Black leaders is that they are afraid of being called racist. If you want to stop them, call them racist and they will stop whatever they're doing. And that's the problem, right? But the reality is, as leaders, the PPP had no problem saying it's a Kuli people party. Jagdeo said it and it was supported by Rohi. And so Black leaders who depend on Black people for their votes must also be bullish enough to say, well, hey, first and foremost, I'm looking into the interest of Black people, right? Yes, other people are suffering, but Black Lives Matter is not. Why did I say that? I didn't want to go there. Like Granger said, when Granger was asked about the Black Lives Matter, he said, yes, Black Lives Matter, but other lives matter. That is the kind of political correctness that is leaving Black people, in many instances, out in the cold. We need leaders who will stand up for the people who stand up for them and demand for the people who demand for them. Blacks are the way they are in this society right now because of the failure of our leaders to embrace affirmative action. We talk about grant money. Our leaders refuse to even acknowledge a proposal made by one of the leading professors in the Caribbean region. The PPP embraced it, albeit in a different form. But those are the things which have us where we are. And the reality is, if you're going to confront this government and get what is just for Black people and the oppressed, we have to forget about being politically correct sometimes.
Kanaki, let me stay with you because you were one of the chief organizer, if not the chief organizer of the protests this weekend. And I understand that protest is going to move to Victoria on Sunday. And the protest was sponsored by CAMS TV and the programs associated within this program, inclusive. And you didn't stress your political party when you were organizing that protest. Although those of us who were the ones organizing came from a particular political party. We were very careful. We were very careful to organize the protests as protests of the people. Explain why.
You know, I generally say from the time I started this program, I've always said, sometimes in private to people, y'all think I'm fighting for the opposition. Me, I'm fighting for the opposition. I am fighting for the people of this country. I'm fighting for the oppressed, right? The opposition, or many members of the opposition, they got AC offices and they live in quote unquote the good life, right? So my interest is not about fighting for politicians. I'm interested in fighting for the.
Here's the question, Aki. Why not stress the political party? Why the organizers stress that because of people's protest?
Because in my mind, it is the people who are aggrieved, it is the people who are suffering, it is the people who must have the opportunity to speak to their leaders and say, listen, this is what we're going through, and y'all ain't recognizing it. Right? Also, there was no need in my mind or intention to stress political party, because I believe, like they say, all are involved, all are consumed. Stressing a political party might very well have ended up in a divisive protest action, and therefore you would have perhaps crippled the entire intention of bringing the masses of the people onto them.
And certainly those who spoke at the rally after the protest were members of the AFC, PNC, and the WPA. Bringing back here, Aubrey Norton. We've noticed over the last year, have we noticed over the last year, any change in the way in which the ABCEU countries have operated, because they were central to the installment of the PPP? Have we seen any shift from them or from CARICOM over the last year?
Okay. First of all, I want to caution against us who are organizing the protests, the public domain. I've been in politics long, and we should never give our opponents the opportunity to identify a lead and go after it. So as we do political work, I think we should keep those elements within our closet. As it relates to the international community, I think we are seeing changes. We've seen pronouncements from members of the Congress. We're seeing interaction with the opposition. And in one case, we actually had a demand to the government asking them to deal with the racism. But it is not a complete change. We still have Sarah Ann Lynch, who is a vestige of the installation. And so we have to skillfully relate to the American government, but treat her as an outsider who has no interest in Ghana and was part of that very bad experience during the 2020 elections. That apart, we're seeing the coming of new diplomats, and we expect, we'll say, by case Sarah to Sarah. But while we wait on that, we need to acknowledge the changes that are occurring at the level of the State Department, at the level of the British, and in some regards, the Canadians. And so we need to continue to work to inform them about the transgressions of the People's Progressive Party and its leadership. We need to continue to engage them. One of the errors of the AP and UAC, in my opinion, while in government, is their inability to develop relationships with key international actors. And that we have begun to rectify. It has to be rectified. Also, when one speaks here, one has to talk about the significant role being played by the diaspora, especially Rickford Burke, because the diaspora is critical in bridging the gap and ensuring we keep people abreast with what is happening. Now, I believe the pressure that is emerging from the international community is affecting the PPP. And it is one of the reasons why they are fighting for recognition. And they have a strategy which I call they placate with resources so that they can control and dominate. And as they placate with these resources and control and dominate, they put mechanisms in place to enrich the elite. And as they do that, the masses will turn a blind eye. It is for that reason we have to get out there, educate, and speak to our people. I was in the Northwest on the weekend, and in every community, I mean, the PPP is so insecure that from the time I arrived, they send the police to say there will be no meetings. And I said to the police, I heard you, you can go to hell. I have a right as Guyanese to meet people, and I will meet people. If you come, I will deal with it as the situation emerges. But I said to the police then, ensure you not use as a tool, because in Port Kaituma, they are suppressing people. In one case, the building I was to keep the meeting in, they actually told the person they will withdraw the contract, some contract, if they allow the meeting to be kept, even though we would have paid. And so I said to them, okay, we had a supporter who is not afraid of them, and we kept the meeting there, and we had successful meetings. When you move to Arakaka, they are pushing the blacks off of the land in Arakaka. They want to dominate the area, and the tension is growing there. When you go to Matthews Ridge, our people are crying out. And so they have a system of repression across the country. And that is why I said we need to return to grassroots politics, where we are in every community getting the information and exposing the People's Progressive Party. Because in these communities, the people, they are suppressing them, because the elite in the region are so greedy that they have to exclude the average PPP supporter. And so inside these communities, we're seeing a rejection of the hub of the PPP by the ordinary PPP members. Now, their resources to bribe are limited. But when it comes to corruption, the cabal that controls the regions are interested in money for themselves, and in the process they can't deliver services. And so
let's go ahead. I'll be finished.
Let me make this last point. The point I'm making is that the solidarity of the PPP is being fractured by the PPP. And as we mobilize, we need to mobilize from all sectors. But we need to note there are elements in the PPP who disagree with them, but are afraid because they instill fear and use force.
Mark Benchop, any changes from the international community that you can discern?
Before I respond to your question directly, I just want to say, to some extent, I agree with Aubrey about grassroots politics, return to grassroots politics. It's funny that political parties wait until they're no longer in power to talk about this grassroots politics and the return. If the coalition had played that politics while they were in office, then there's a high possibility we would not be talking about the coalition as an opposition today. It is a sad situation. I just thought I'd make that clear. Another point of clarification is that there are a lot of groups in the diaspora who are in contact with their local congressmen, their local senators, and the politicians over here to highlight what is going on. I think there are a tremendous lot of US politicians who are aware by way of their local groups and so forth. Some do it quietly and some do it through the cameras. Having said that, in answering your question directly about whether there's any change, there's a slight change as it pertains to the US ambassador there in Guyana, Ms. Sarah Ann Lynch. That is because there's a change of administration. Had it not been a change of administration in the US, we would have seen her approach being even more aggressive. Is she going to be gone anytime soon? Even though she's approaching retirement age and maybe she would probably join her husband's dental practice. I doubt that, because if she goes now, then they're not going to have a replacement anytime soon. The Senate is not likely to approve another ambassador anytime soon to Guyana. And so maybe she will be asked to extend her stay. Maybe this is what she's fighting for. But yes, we have seen a slight change from her aggression. But her agenda remains the same, which is to stay quiet when African Guyanese are being brutalized, to stay quiet when African Guyanese are being persecuted, and these sort of things. Occasionally, we may see a press release like, good luck to the Guyanese Olympics team. Good luck to them, and these sort of things. The British seem to, have a less aggressive approach this time around from what we saw from the predecessor of this current UK High Commissioner. And that guy was something else. The lady from the Canadian High Commissioner, the same thing. She's now in Barbados, very quiet. But what she risked in Guyana, I say this, she dare not risk that in Barbados at all. People seem to take their eyes and pass Guyanese. One other thing quickly, Kadaki mentioned, or was it Aubrey? I respectfully disagree with Aubrey that in any protest action, whilst yes, the people get together and say enough is enough, leaders are identified from those protests. Leaders are identified from those activities. And no one should be afraid to stand up and say, like for instance, out in Buxton, young Kadaki and some other youngsters there, and Shara Duncan I saw, and the other parliamentary whip. They were
Chris
there.
Jones.
Chris Jones, they should not be afraid to stand up and say, we are here to take our positions as young leaders. Nothing is wrong with that. Again, I respectfully disagree with Aubrey. Identify those leaders, whether they are locked up, whether they are charged or whatever, that's what leaders go through. Look at what's happening in Washington. Politicians are being locked up from the Black Caucus and so forth. They're being arrested. They're walking down because that's what they're there for as leaders, to represent their people, not hide behind some sort of pulpit.
Okay, Aubrey Norton, you want to respond to Mark? No, Aubrey's gone. All right, we're coming down to program time, and I will give each of you some closing remarks as we move forward. On Thursday, I'm hoping to have the official opposition. On Thursday, I'm hoping to have official opposition members on. Tonight, although you guys belong to political parties, you were speaking here in your own individual capacities, and I'm trying to get a PNC official, an AFC official, and a WPA official to come on, give the official party position in the last year and what we are going to do. What next? What next as we look to the next year? Bobby, I was asking if you had any response. Mark.
What I wanted to say is this. I wasn't saying that we should not be leaders and we shouldn't be in the forefront. Everybody know we are leaders, etc. But I was talking, but when we talk about a specific protest and identify who behind it. And then another protest, you remember, and then the People's Progressive Party will go, trump up charges, and go in a particular direction. I believe our protest should be organized. The leaders will be there and they will be known, but I do not believe as a matter of tactic, it should be us saying, Kadaki arranging thing, Aubrey arranging X, this person arranging Y. It must be, it has been organized, it has leaders, the leaders will lead, but it is not for us to give the police and everybody information that they can utilize. That is the point I was making. In my own case,
I got that point in terms of being organized and so forth, but we must not be afraid to confront the PPP. We must not allow the PPP to dictate our show as what we should say or what we shouldn't say. If Kadaki is a leader for Buxton and organizing groups in Buxton, Kadaki should not be afraid to say, I have started this protest and I am leading this protest. We're not concerned about the PPP. I remember those days when David Hines and myself and Lincoln and a few others were out there. We were saying we are there as leaders standing up against the oppressive regime. Whether they lock us up, whether they have trumped up charges against us or not, we are not bothered about the PPP. And I'm saying to the young leaders, don't be bothered about the PPP. Stand up as leaders, and we as older folks, gosh, I'm saying that now, older folks, right? We are going to support you guys 100%. I respectfully agree to disagree with Aubrey Norton.
Okay, gentlemen. I think the point I was driving at when I was asking Kiraki the question was to establish the philosophy of self-organization outside of political parties. Because I think political parties, when they organize things, they tend to limit them. You know, they tend to want to control them. And the philosophy that we come from is a philosophy of self-organization, whereas if there is a political person, a party member in a particular community, that member should be able to organize and mobilize as a community member, as opposed to a member of the party waiting for instructions from the party. Because I think over the last year, that's where we got ourselves waiting for the signal from the leadership of what we could do in communities. And I think what we are trying to introduce on the East Side and on the East Coast is that we don't have to wait on political parties to tell us what we must do in our community. Yes. Yes, Aubrey.
I agree with you, but I also agree that in protest, there are certain mechanisms you have to put in place. For instance, a battery of lawyers to deal with what Mark mentioned. I believe that we have to skillfully mobilize and organize our people, but I also believe we must not be the people who expose our people unnecessarily. And that is the point I'm making. I agree with you as in a region. What I told him in no uncertain, you do your work. I agree, but we disagree on tactic.
There you go. All right,
I had asked you at 8, so I am really behind time.
Gentlemen, Kidaki Amsterdam, Mark Benshop, Aubrey Norton, thank you all so much for coming on to Politics 101. We continue this conversation on Thursday when we are trying to get the official members of the opposition to come on and to make their case about what transpired in the last year and what we hope to see going forward. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Hines. And let me say before I leave, let me remind viewers, come out I urge you to support the Wednesday lunchtime protest. Numbers matter. And most importantly for me right now, turn out and support Victoria. Victoria is hosting a protest on Sunday. And let every community organize so that the pushback can start. As Dr. Hines say, it's a call to battle. So let's join the battle line. Thank you, viewers. Thank you, Dr. Hines.
Kadaki, I would say don't let the police bully you guys into not using loudspeakers and speakers and things. To hell with the police. Protest if you guys get a protest. That's my position. Dr. Hines, you know how we do it.
I have my own ways.
I got you. I got you, bro.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you all so much. And to the audience, thank you for staying with us for another edition of Politics 101. On Thursday, we hope, as I say, to have the big ones, the official ones, come and to give us their take on what has happened since the electoral coup of August 2020. Again, Politics 101 comes to you with lots of love. We want to make a contribution to civilized discourse, but a discourse that contributes to the mobilization of our people. Thank you and good night.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.